with our last topic. This is going to be your question for the lecture. So get ready. Okay, I know it doesn't deal with history, but let's take just a slight break from all the action. So here's your question. Okay, over the weekend, Mr. Welch went to the Bears game. Okay, we're both huge Bears fans. Okay, now besides being a Bears fan, Mr. Welch loves to talk about his admiration of Mr. Tom Brady, number 12. And he has his jersey. He even thought about wearing the Tom Brady jersey to the Bears game. He ended up not wearing it. Good decision, Mr. Welch. Besides that, he also has Josh Gordon. He's a wide receiver on the Patriots, and he's on his fantasy team. So Mr. Welch went to the game. If you're not familiar what happened, Chicago Bears lost a really close game to New England Patriots. So my question for you guys is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how disappointed was Mr. Welch in the Bears losing? 1 being he was actually pretty excited that they lost. He loves Tom Brady. He was excited that his guy won. Josh Gordon got a lot of catches, got a lot of fantasy points. All the way from a 10 to being completely disappointed like me and my Bears that they lost. So from a scale of 1 to 10, how disappointed was Mr. Welch in the Bears loss this week? Okay, switching back to our last topic. Banking and speculative consequences. Now, I'm a little biased. I'm an econ guy. I love talking about banking. I love talking about, recessions, depressions, economic booms, capital, etc. So I'm going to take a little bit of time to describe banking because it might have been a little bit confusing for some of us in currencies. So let's start with the second bank of the United States. Like I said earlier in the lecture, that a lot of these companies were financed by the second bank of the United States. And this was a private bank. Today we have private banks like JP Morgan, Citigroup, Lehman Brothers, Wells Fargo. I can go on. All these big private banks. Back then, so we talked about the debate between Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. And they were debating the first Bank of the United States. Its charter was not renewed. Eventually, the Second Bank of the United States was founded in 1816 and is signed on a 20-year charter till 1836. So please write that down in your notes. Charter from 1816 to 1836, and that'll be important in a little bit later. So the Bank of the United States, it had a couple of different jobs. It established credit for the United States. It helped pay off debts. Also, speaking of the market revolution, it helped fund a lot of these businesses. So again, going back to this example of Mr. Welch, besides just issuing stocks to people like Thomas, one of his initial investments or loans he receives is from the Bank of the United States. The bank says, hey, Mr. Welch, we need to make some money. And how banks make money, they give loans to people. So they give a loan to Mr. Welch, say, hey, in 30 years, pay us back this loan. Mr. Welch, business booms, he pays off his debt, he needs more money, issues stocks, yada, yada, yada. So these banks are very important in funding a lot of businesses that popped up during the market revolution. But as we saw with Andrew Jackson, he really didn't like the bank. Speaking of being for the common man, again, hitting on some conversations we had in class, he believed that the bank favored some wealthy individuals. This may seem kind of confusing, but like a business like Mr. Welch's, who has a lot of factories that create shoes, the Second Bank of the United States, it was also a business, and you can actually buy stock in the bank. So you can actually own the bank. Different from today, where the Federal Reserve that we have, you can't actually own it, but you can buy the United States debt. Whereas this bank, you can actually have private ownership. And this worried Andrew Jackson because actually a majority of the holding of this bank was exactly 80% of it. Please write that down, actually. 80% of the bank was owned by very wealthy people, especially in the Northeast, and people in different countries like France, Great Britain, Spain. So you can probably connect the dots and see where Jackson's kind of worried because, the average man's getting screwed. They're not getting in on this investment. Plus, he's kind of worried that they have control over this very important institution that's in charge of collecting, not collecting, but all of the tax revenue the United States get is deposited. So when you think about deposit, think about your parents or yourself getting a paycheck. It's deposited in your bank. All of the revenue from the United States is deposited in this bank. And then that revenue in return is loaned out to other people, the issue of bonds, and it's owned by wealthy individuals, which worries Jackson. Also, he hates debt. Okay, I'm going to come back to what happened to the debt in a second. Okay, so he eventually gets rid of the bank. He does this through 2 ways. Number 1, he takes out all of the deposits. So like I said, all of the money that the United States makes goes into this bank. Well, Jackson's like, screw that. I don't like the bank. So he takes out all the money from the bank, and plus in 1836, he does not renew the charter of the bank. So the bank goes away. Okay, he's a happy guy, but we're going to see that later that this has some drastic consequences. Okay, so this brings us to a couple terms that I have, and I want to explain them because the book goes over it, and like I said, maybe it might be confusing, but hard and soft currencies. So let's flip to these pictures. This is an example of hard currency. Okay, hard currency, literally think touching money, and think gold and silver. So the Constitutional Convention set up currencies, and they printed at first paper bills. After our country was founded, we issued hard currencies. Okay, so part of our government would issue actual money. So the mints. Okay, today we have mints. We don't print gold anymore. We print actual paper dollar bills. But back then, you would print hard coins like this. And so how these hard coins would get distributed through the national bank. Again, Mr. Welch wants this loan, or people want small loans. But actually, probably a bigger way they get this currency is thinking about day-to-day operations. So Aiden goes to work in the factory. He gets his paycheck. He might get in a slip. And the slip says, Aiden, go to a branch of the Bank of the United States. Go to this branch, and at this branch, they have all of these gold coins and silver coins. And he exchanges that pieces of paper, and he takes out the gold and silver because Mr. Welch has all of his wealth in the same bank. And so instead of him literally reaching his pocket, paying Aiden in gold, he pays him this piece of paper, and all of Welch's gold and silver is safely held in the bank. That is hard currency, gold and silver. And here are different values of the currencies back then. So we see a $10 eagle was actually 16 grams of gold, pure gold. So it's actually a lot of gold compared to today. So as you can see, $10 back then, a lot more valuable than $10 today. This is called soft currency. So soft currency, like I said, kind of think of that piece of paper that Mr. Welch gave Aiden. Okay, it's kind of like an IOU. So it kind of represents currency in the bank because, again, it's very risky to move gold and silver. So I used the example in government class today. Bryce, Logan, Cameron, Maggie are probably rolling their heads like, oh my God, we talked about this today in government. I understand, but so imagine if you're someone who's trying to move from New York to South Carolina. You need to move everything. Okay, you can't just move all of your wealth in the form of gold and silver because you might get robbed. So what you do is you put all that hard cash in the bank. The bank gives you the soft currency, which says, hey, here's a receipt that says Maggie, who has $1 million in the bank, high roller. She's moving from New York to South Carolina. So when she goes back to another branch of the Bank of the United States, she has all this money, gives it to the bank in Carolina, pulls out all her cash. Okay, so where this comes into play. And I want you to write this down next to hard and soft currency. Okay, pros and cons. Pros of hard currency, you can't really fake it. I mean, it's pure gold. It's there. It's very valid. If someone pays you in gold, they go, oh, wow, it's gold. Okay, it's not just a piece of paper. So a pro is that it's very valuable. It's very tangible. A con is that it's uses the term liquid, and I'm not going to go into detail what this means, but it's very hard to obtain gold. Like I said, Mr. Welch wants to pay Aiden in gold. It's very hard for him to transfer all these funds. So a con of hard currency is that it's hard to transfer this money to different people and to different hands. On the flip side, con and benefits of soft currencies. A pro of a soft currency, like we just stated in our examples, is that it's very easy to transfer these funds. Okay, if you want to move, if you don't want to hold on to all your money in your purse, it's very easy to have a piece of paper. Okay, a con of this is that sometimes banks, other than the second bank in the United States, would create their own currencies. So you have, back then, states had their own banks. Besides states, even businesses had their banks, and they would make their own currencies. So imagine, as you can see right here, dollar bills that were issued by the Bank of Lexington. And sometimes, here's one from San Francisco. I couldn't find pictures of outlandish ones, but imagine if, let's say, Kate Hattlestead wanted to make her own currency, and she had a bunch of gold, and she's just like printing off currencies with her face on it. It's like currency of Kate. And then, so as you can see, it's not really regulated, and it's kind of shady. And so these currencies are not, they're very risky. Okay, so that's hard and soft money. Now, this all plays into something called over-speculation. And this helped cause the Panic of 1837. At the time, the worst recession ever. Here's a picture people losing jobs, losing money, businesses being on the street, not being able to eat, to afford food, rent, etc. And this happened through something called over-speculation. And so what that means is speculation is essentially a fancy word of saying like gambling. Okay, instead of gambling in a casino, you gamble on an investment. So again, we have all this land in the West. Let's say someone who wants to take a risk, like Gavin White. Okay, he takes a loan out from the Bank of the United States, and he purchases a bunch of land, let's say in Illinois. Okay, well, he's a speculator, he's a gambler. Instead of he wants to take the easy way out, instead of moving there and farming all of the land, he bought it all quickly. He turned to someone like, let's say, I'm sorry, I'm running out of names. Let's say Avery Dominique. Okay, Avery Dominique actually wants to farm all this land in Illinois. Gavin buys all this land, sells it to Dominique for like a 1% increase. And he does this very quickly. Okay, so that's speculation. That's quick borrowing and selling it for a quick profit. Okay, and Gavin does this a bunch of times. He actually makes a bunch of money without even seeing all this land. And this happened a lot in the old Northwest. Okay, we saw this pattern of people buying land, farming, and now this farmland is gaining value. So now Gavin has to borrow more money to buy more land, more farming. It's higher valued. He has to borrow more money to do this. And all of a sudden we have something called a bubble. And I'm going to post a link on Classroom that explains bubbles, and it does a really good job of explaining what it is. But essentially, all this land was over-speculated. It was overvalued. And then all of a sudden something happened with President Van Buren. I'm going to end the lecture with this. He becomes president. Him and the Jacksonian Democrats are rolling on political highs. Everyone is loving Jackson. He's literally and figuratively riding out of the office on a chariot, and his right-hand man Van Buren comes into office. And while he's in office, the first time and the only time in American history, very important, I want you to write this down next to Van Buren's name, where the United States actually has zero debt. They actually, for the only time ever in our history, have a complete surplus of money. They have extra money. The government made money like a business. So what do? They're like, hey, we're just going to give it back to the states. We're good guys. We believe in states' rights. This actually came back to bite them in the butt. And so Van Buren is trying to give back this money to the states like Ohio and Indiana. And they're like, oh, cool, we'll take the money. And Van Buren's like, it's a catch. He goes, there's a bunch of these shady loans going out. And he says, I'll trade these like terrible loans, in exchange for this real currency that I have. Okay? And while doing that, and all these states call back these terrible loans, they're fraudulent, people don't have the money, all of this land is over-speculated, it's actually not being farmed, and let's say, a couple acres of land is priced at, and I'm just guessing, let's say $100,000, and really it's only worth $2,000. And it's all in the form of these loans and these paper currencies, and people can't pay them back. And all of a sudden, like the light bulb goes off. And all of a sudden, we have this huge panic where people don't know what anything's valued, and it's going nuts. And all kind of started, and it's not Van Buren's fault. He's just trying to give money back to the states. But he kind of exposes how risky all of these loans are. And the last thing I want to say, this term free bank era, and how all of this ties in. After Jackson wins the bank war, draw an arrow between the bank war and the free bank era. So from 1836, when the bank was dissolved, you had these free banks. Like I said, remember the Bank of Kate and the Bank of Lexington? They kind of took off because now people can't get trusted loans from the Bank of the United States. Now they have to get these shady loans from Kate and the Bank of Lexington and the Bank of San Francisco. So now you have all of these people like Kate's like, laughing to herself. She might have only 100 literal 10 gold eagles sitting in her pocket, but she's handing out all these shady loans and blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden this time bomb goes off and all these loans kind of explode. And so, again, not completely Van Buren's fault. Kind of a consequence of taking away the bank is that you, like I said, and repeated several times, is that these terrible soft monies or soft currencies or loans are being given out. And that kind of wraps up the lecture. So thank you for paying attention. Hopefully you've been taking notes. If you have any questions, please come talk to Mr. Welch and I. Like I said, you're going to use all of these notes on the DBQ in class on Thursday. Make sure you respond to the question. If you're listening to the whole lecture, you will know when I asked the question. Thank you for listening. I will see you in class tomorrow.